Thank you for inviting me, Jeremy. It's a real pleasure.
We finally are here. It took quite a while to get to this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I was unwell. I was sick. I had a sinusitis that dragged on. You were very, very patient. Took a long time to clear it out. I live in Spain now, and I thought I would bounce back health-wise. You know, you can come to a new country, a new place, and something hits your system wrong, even though it's wonderful. It's sun-drenched. It's, you know, I'm very happy to be here. But it is actually possible that I've encountered my old friend mold again. I don't know how to check for mold in Spain.
Spain. I didn't know you were in Spain. Okay, that explains a bunch of things now. How are you finding it? I've never been. As an African, it's very difficult to go to Europe. Schengen visas are not the easiest to get.
Right. I love it. So my son moved here almost 8 years ago. He came to Granada. He fell in love with it. And he just moved to Granada. And then 3 years ago, he got married to his now wife, Paula. And I was back and forth. And I would say that when I this might sound strange, but I didn't exactly move to Spain. One of the times I came to Spain, I just didn't go back. And my son said, "Mom, can't you just stay?" And I was experiencing so many strange things. I am essentially a targeted individual since many years, and things were just I was just being hit with all kinds of, you know, bizarre things happening in the States. I've never felt safe, but it felt more and more like, so I feel like I almost defected to Spain. I didn't move to Spain the way a proper person would, like you spend a year or two tying up all the loose ends and selling your things and so forth. So this is a repeat of when I was 11. My mother took us to Sweden in the middle of a very tumultuous divorce, and she just told us we're not going back. So I've thought about this. I think this is ingrained in me that, you know, you go to a country and then you just stay there. So it has these elements of like I feel like I, to some extent, defected and didn't plan it very well. I absolutely am I don't know if this is the right word, Hispanophile at this point. I love so many things about the culture, the people. I write about it sometimes, actually regularly on my Substack. I'm sort of in awe. The language is coming rather slowly, but it's coming along. But I've also noticed that, I would say I've experienced that moving to a new country later in life with a new language, new everything, it's not like when you're watching videos online and just because you find things more wonderful and the way things ought to be, your whole system can sort of freeze up and go into almost like a kind of a shock because nothing is familiar. So I've experienced a lot more of an adjustment period than I had wanted, including things like a return of some of my fatigue symptoms, which I've been battling for many years. So that's a whole part of my life and has been for the last 15 years. I started out writing about other people's disease, as it were. AIDS is the one I'm most known for. And then I myself became felled with chronic illness for many, many years. So I'm super fascinated by that whole subject. And right now, I'm in a good place. My latest mini obsession is intramuscular B12, which I started to take on the advice of a friend, and it turned everything around in days. So we're not talking about, health hacks right now, but only to say when you and I first started communicating, my energy was just really bad, and now I'm on the upswing.
Intramuscular B12. Hang on. I've never heard of that.
So there's sublingual B12, there's B12 capsules. It's just you inject yourself with B12 in the arm and the leg.
Why inject yourself as opposed to consuming
because
it?
that's the only, okay, so it turns out, all right, I'll go ahead and I'll be brief, but here's the deal with B12 as I understand it so far. So I have come to understand in recent weeks that you can be severely B12 deficient even though you eat meat. So I was a carnivore for years. I'm not really a carnivore anymore. I'm not against it, but I just, it wasn't working for me as well nearly when I came to Spain. So I started including some fruits and vegetables.
It's also very boring.
Yeah, let's face it. It is. It is. And to get depressed by the same way a prisoner would get depressed, right? If it's the same food every day, that's not good for your health either. To just be so depressed, like, really? I can never eat an apple? Really? So there's something called pernicious anemia, which I now think may have been what I had, and that comes from having, to put it simply, digestive problems, gut problems, which is, of course, the nexus of virtually everybody's health problems. So I definitely had that. I had, a mercury assault as a child, 11 mercury fillings put in when I was 11 years old when we moved to Sweden. I had just tons of problems. So I had a big clue about a year and a half ago. I tried to donate blood in New York, and there was a child who was getting a cancer surgery, and his mom wanted non-vaccinated blood, non-COVID vaccinated blood. So I went to the clinic, and lo and behold, they rejected me for having low platelets. And I thought, what? How on earth can I be anemic when I'm a carnivore? So that's when I should have done a deep dive into the possibility I had pernicious anemia. So I haven't been properly diagnosed, but I'm working with a woman in the UK who does consultations, and you tell her your symptoms. She sends the B12, and if you feel a lot better, you probably did have a B12 deficiency. So, yeah.
Diet is, for me, one of the most important topics, actually, because if you wake up feeling rubbish, then very little else matters.
Right. Exactly. I was right there for, I don't want to count the years, 15 years, spending probably 85% of my time just trying to feel okay, just trying to feel better, endlessly researching, spending every last dollar I came across. And this is after I'm already exiled from journalism, not making a regular income. So I fell into this kind of underworld almost of being ill, not knowing what was wrong with me, not knowing, and really the subject that brings us together, what makes us sick, what does diet have to do with it, what does environment, air, technology, everything, like what is actually making me sick? And this question, I don't actually feel like we ever fully resolved it in the AIDS camp, and it was just as tricky to resolve it for myself. It's very individual, and it's not the sum of its parts. Often, people, when you feel like, oh, I'm eating like a saint, I'm doing all the right things, and you can still, there's something you're missing,
Your background, in writing and research, from what I discovered, is essentially HIV/AIDS. That's what you're known for.
That's what I'm known for, yeah.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Diet is intricately linked to that. Here in South Africa, as you most likely know, with the huge ARV rollout that happened in the mid-2000s, the president at the time, Thabo Mbeki, and his health minister were trying to tell the population to change their diet to become healthier. And this was laughed at and it was mocked. And of course, he was removed as the president, and he was replaced by Jacob Zuma, who then had the largest ARV rollout, I think, in South African history. what did they say? Nothing about diet. They just said, take these drugs and keep taking them basically until you die.
Absolutely.
And those drugs, which are effectively chemotherapy drugs, make you sicker and sicker and sicker.
Okay, wow. Where do I begin? So
Sorry, what I was doing is I was creating a segue there because you were talking about diet, and for me, diet is so intricately linked to HIV/AIDS.
Absolutely. So in 2000, actually, it really began in 1999 when Thabo Mbeki did this amazing thing and stood up. We were jubilant. Who's we? Dissenters against HIV theory. And we had been at it since 1987. I was a first generation HIV dissenter.
David Rasnick also, I think.
Dave Rasnick came along, Joan Shenton in the UK. So 1987 is where I usually start the clock because that's when Peter Duesberg's piece, first broadside against it all, comes out in the journal Cancer Research. That's when the war in earnest kicks off between him and them, and between Fauci, journalists who covered it. I was one of the first ones by just a strange fluke, being either in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time. But I was at Spin magazine, and it was a rock magazine that favored contrarian investigative journalism. And I read about it in the New York Native, went running in, we got to cover this story. I won't go into all the details. I've done it about, who said yes and who said no. But suffice to say, I had the full backing in the end of the publisher of Spin magazine. So we stayed on that story for 10 solid years. And the international dissident community was growing and growing. A lot of luminaries. It seemed now, looking back, like the top people in every field joined the opposition to Gallo's preposterous HIV so-called theory. And Fauci was, the silent godfather behind the scenes, pulling the strings, terminating funding for anything and anybody who stepped one iota outside of doctrinaire orthodox I might call it like Leninist AIDS HIV theory, which was HIV by itself with no other contributing factors is the single and sufficient cause of AIDS. And anybody who dares stray in the direction of suggesting otherwise must be punished as a counter-revolutionary force that has to be removed as a threat to AIDS research, which was a revolutionary. It was a cult. It was a huge money laundering operation. It was a psyop. Lots of words I could use to describe it. But when Thabo Mbeki came out, and I remember it like it was yesterday, we all felt liberation was imminent. That surely a head of state of his, especially with his political pedigree and of his stature, how much he was respected, that it was going to be a Berlin Wall moment for us. Everybody was going to understand, And then he had the conference. I was there in Pretoria. We journalists were not allowed.
The one that fell apart.
The one that fell apart. Like everything fell apart. And now looking back, it's like, how could we be so naive? Well, I admire him enormously. And what you're talking about was so insanely politicized, the matter of food and nutrition. We were treated, all of us, and Mbeki and his health minister, our mutual friend Anthony Brink, used to try to teach me how to pronounce her name.
Mantu Shabalala Msamang.
Thank you. I won't attempt to repeat that.
I stumbled there.
She was. Women were always more viciously targeted. My memory is that she was essentially bullied into sickness and her premature death. The AIDS activists in South. So we have AIDS activists in America, and they're pretty awful. Your AIDS activists were of a different caliber altogether. The Zaki Akhmat crowd, they were ultra, and you'll stop me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but revolutionary Marxism fused with...
I've met Zaki.
Okay. And for them, any talk about food or nutrition or clean water was...
You get laughed at.
Much worse, I think. They treated it like you were the absolute Antichrist. You were because what was the cherished, what was the cult centered on? It was centered on ARVs, as you said. It was centered on access to the most poisonous drugs imaginable. And and then you had people like coming out of the apartheid fight, like the amazing, and I knew him, I loved him, I miss him, Dr. Sam Shlongo, who always talked about, who was, an advisor to Thabo Mbeki, and he said, what has happened to your heads? In the apartheid fight, 50% in the apartheid era, 50% of Black South African children were dead by the age of 5. In other words, they swept away all of these issues of poverty, malnutrition, death, sickness and death, and in comes AIDS, and now everything is HIV. They, the AIDS activists.
Yeah, but sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but Mbeki said that. He said AIDS was a disease of poverty.
Exactly. And then you had the radical Marxist faction in your country, the Akhmat faction, the revolutionary Marxist faction, demonizing that. I mean, that's a real weird inversion, that the Marxist faction would demonize the connection between poverty, malnutrition, and illness for Black South Africans in post-apartheid South Africa. Like, it couldn't get any more bizarre. But that was, and then the whole global left-ish, left of center kind of highbrow media piled on Mbeki in the most vile, racist, derogatory terms. The way they attacked him, it was breathtaking. People who didn't live through this would never believe it, how mean and vicious and surreal it was. It was surreal. There were no discussions about, yes, well, of course, clean water matters and poverty, and we have to talk about these things. It really was as though, because they knew, because they, the globalist powers that be, knew that this was a slippery slope, right? This is a portal to the real questions. Do viruses exist? Do viruses cause disease? Is contagion real? Because this is their entire multi-trillion-dollar money laundering apparatus and social control super plan, and they're all in on it, right? So we could not figure out at the time, why are they so vicious? They hated us so much, And then when COVID broke out, I mean, I don't mean broke out as an illness. I mean descended as an attack on humanity. Happened, yeah. It started to make sense.
But this is the thing, Celia, and this is why chatting about HIV/AIDS suddenly, in my view, seems more relevant now, because the COVID thing was almost like a mirror image of the AIDS thing. I mean, I've got Mbeki's 2001 AIDS report here in front of me, and on page, is it 16 or 17? I can't see here. The team that wrote the report advised against PCR tests. And look at us. Here we are, post-COVID. Yes. Yeah. In fact, anybody hearing this, you can find a transcript of at least half the conference, the Pretoria conference, on David Rasnick's website. Have you ever seen that document? I've got all the videos also of that event. You do? Yeah, but you have the video. Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. No, but you can't. It's not really watchable because it's all broken and the audio doesn't work and it's not synced correctly and all that sort of stuff. But nonetheless, this is David a very important piece of history. It's a very important piece of history.
And years after it was all said and done, I actually found there was an author. I have no idea his name or the title of his book. I just remember coming across it. And he was writing he wrote some kind of biography of Mbeki. And he put it in there. Maybe he didn't know what he was putting, what it was. But I came upon the fact that after the ARV rollout, no surprise to people like us, the deaths skyrocketed. In other words, the ARV, remember how they used to say that the HIV, you weren't maybe around for this debate at that time, but what they were they had a very precise number. They always told us that we had killed, was it 330,000 South Africans? Can that be right? Or was it 33,000?
That is correct.
Yeah,
it's
300, yeah.
It's just somewhere close to 400,000.
That AIDS denialism had killed. And that
Yes,
turns
correct.
out, and I can dig this up for you, or maybe you already have it. It turns out that was pretty much exactly the number that died in excess after the ARV rollout in South Africa, exactly as we said. Nobody brings it up.
Yeah, in fact, the mortality, overall mortality in South Africa around 2006, 2007, I can't remember precisely which year, was a lot higher than any of the COVID years. And
Exactly.
yet we supposedly had a deadly pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I saw recently Zaki Akhmat in an interview with Christian Amanpour, and my blood just boiled, man. I was like, that guy is still in a position of power and influence.
Here we go. I've got it in front of me. It was around 2005 and 2006 when the ARV rollout occurred. And here we have the highest mortality in South Africa in the last 25 years.
Thank you. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. And all the scalps, all the people who were destroyed and even killed over this in that enormous brawl about South Africa. It's like when they do these attacks, these ops, the train leaves the station, and it's after the train leaves the station when you got to go back, and then nobody goes back and says, well, what happened with all that? What happened? What happened after the fact? And none of us really understand what became of Mbeke's fighting spirit. Maybe he was completely, as I certainly was, you lose your capacity to make a sound, to do anything, because you've endured so much ultra violence, right, that it just feels pointless. But he would be in a prime position to be vindicated, but he probably knows, these people are so vicious and irrational and unfair that it's no point. And media and
yeah, but he was also silenced by the ANC, because remember he's a part of the party.
Yeah, you understand all that a lot better than I imagine as much. But do you think there's any kind of process of his rehabilitation, even if it's behind the scenes? Do you think anybody's trying to rehabilitation in South Africa for the fact that he was right? He was right to do everything he did with AIDS.
He spoke about it. Was it a year or two ago? Very recently. He spoke at a university, and very quickly after that, the ANC again tried to do quote unquote damage control.
Oh, so he's totally, there's no chance then it's the ANC. Yeah. But I also have gotten the sense that Black South Africans in any event that I saw online in many Mbeki contexts were desperately wishing he was still the president.
Yes, but that's a very complex
I'm sure
comment.
it is.
Because
I mean,
the ANC,
he had the love of the people. The media, the AIDS Inc. factions wanted everybody to believe that all South Africans were embarrassed by this president and what he did with HIV/AIDS. But when it doesn't seem to
still
be the
to
case.
this day, he's considered an embarrassment by the media.
That's appalling.
But I mean, Celia, this is what your work has been all about.
Yeah.
It's been you've been pushing back against one of the most powerful cogs in the public health machine.
I know. Yeah, I was. I had no idea when I began. I thought it was fascinating. I thought we all thought resolution, victory was always imminent, right around the corner. We were always, one paper, one scientist, one revelation, over and over and over again, we came upon the facts that by themselves should have torn down the whole ghastly thing. And nothing put a dent in it because it was designed to be wrong and to keep flying. Because it was a revolutionary, doctrinaire, money laundering cult, psyop, mind control, MK Ultra, right? We can throw all our words in. It was all those things. It was, and we mistook it, I want to say tragically, for a scientific and correctable, like a juggernaut, but a juggernaut that you could correct scientifically. And, there went my life. Because it was untouchable, absolutely untouchable. The only thing that got played out was violence against those who countered it. So, I learned a lot about that. I'm not saying that I regret it, and it's irrelevant whether I do or don't. I'm just saying that to this day, when people tinker with it scientifically, I just feel so strongly, for heaven's sakes, it wasn't a scientific matter or thing. They used science jargon to cast all the spells that they cast. But you can't correct something like this with corrective science. It was just deep in the deepest organs and tissues and DNA of the entire culture that good people knew HIV was the single and sufficient cause of AIDS. It was as deep as, what can we compare it to? It took over as let's say there's legit debates about diabetes, nobody gets crazy like that about diabetes, about heart disease. This was not a normal illness, not a normal, it was so, if I say cult, that doesn't do it justice. And if I say psyop, that doesn't do it justice. Maybe you have some words,
but the COVID thing is the same, though.
It's the same, but we need a term for what these its are. They are.
It's dogmatic, also.
They are wrecking ball social engineering projects on such a grand scale, with so much money in them and through them, and they create entire cultures that are paid off to support them. So I do think my word revolution is an important word, because what happens when there's a revolution, everything changes very fast, so nothing that was believed 2 days ago counts anymore. It becomes necessary to kill everybody who could threaten the revolution. The revolution must survive. The revolutionaries, they survive. And anybody who says, what is all, they get taken out and shot. So it was like a bloodless revolution in biology, starting in the United States. So American biology, through this dark moment of Robert Gallo announcing HIV was the cause of AIDS, was also simultaneously destroyed. And those biologists, virologists, real scientists and academics who saw it and protested it, what I really covered was what happened to them. Primarily, that's what I covered. I didn't cover the about every last scientific detail this way or that, because I was on the ground covering the sociological, nightmarish phenomenon of this whole thing.
Luc Montagnier was his partner in crime, and I think it was in the 1990s when he publicly said that HIV does not need to be the sole cause of AIDS, and that has been largely severely suppressed, that particular comment of his.
Luc Montagnier, I remember it vividly. He came out in the very early 90s, and he came out at a conference, and he got behind a scientist named Dr. Shai-Ching Lo, who was proposing that a mycoplasma could have something to do with the development of AIDS. Montagnier, in relative innocence, came out and said, I think this is interesting. I don't remember exactly what he said. Again, for all of us, this was a huge moment. I devoted one or more columns. I had a column that was called Words from the Front that covered this war blow by blow. That was a very big deal. They went ballistic, berserk on him. Oh, it was, I'm trying to remember the detail. I mean, people denouncing him on the spot, threatening to end the conference, storming out. He got in a lot of immediate hot water, again, as if he had lost his mind, because they knew if they gave a fraction of an inch to the opposition, it would eventually potentially be game over. So this is, to me, I know I'm harping on it, but the climate of viciousness is really what they perfected, like how to freak out so utterly and thoroughly, and how to punish people so elaborately. That's kind of the untold story of it all. So Montagnier was, I would say, shocked and pushed back on his heels a little bit, chastened. You know, he understood what could happen. He understood he could be obliterated, and they'd made an example of Peter Duisberg and other real out of the closet, straight up dissidents. And I'm not going to accuse him of any kind of cowardice or anything, but after that, he kind of spoke out of both sides of his mouth, but whatever backroom deals they made, you know, and then it got into John Crewdson's work on whether Robert Gallo had misappropriated Montagnier's original sample that kicked off the whole nightmare. And so then it was in litigation, and everybody kind of made Luc Montagnier into it was like the black sheep and the white sheep. So Gallo was the black sheep. So he sort of had to carry the bag for an HIV theory I don't think he ever believed in. The French never said it was the cause of AIDS. And then, of course, he got the Nobel Prize. So you see how it works? It was because Gallo had been found guilty of scientific misconduct and fraud by the whole John Crewdson chapter. So they couldn't really keep Bob Gallo in the race as the HIV king. So it went to Montagnier. And there was a lot of resentment against Gallo that also got expressed as support for Luc Montagnier. Sort of white knight, dark knight kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? So he was always a little bit, he was just not the kind of scientist who said, I know what I know, I'm not backing down. He wasn't one of those, but nor was he one of the bad guys. And then I think his true colors came out. I mean, what's the more positive way to say true colors? His better angels came out. Finally, with COVID, he was able to speak a little more freely. I mean, all of this is character. These are characters. These are like Shakespearean plays. All of them. All of this is about ambition, greed, idealism. That's why I was always fascinated by the characters, the scientists, and the differences between them. And I was interested in the good ones, not the bad ones. I was interested in the ones who I was just fascinated by how they could stand up and say what it felt to me that even then, like, you guys are like a dying breed. You're not even going to be around when, because what you're doing is going against your own interests and all the money. Everyone's saying you're crazy and awful and murderous, and still you're saying it. You're seeing something that's so important to you. And that was really inspiring to me. Like if I was a nature photographer, I want to photograph the last, snow leopards or something, because they were very fascinating. And their story hasn't been told. There were thousands of them.
Yeah, in your Substack, you you spoke recently about the opposition and the viciousness of it.
Yep. COINTELPRO. I don't know that much more about COINTELPRO than the next person. I just have seen it over and over and over again, where you get, it's the Trotsky phenomenon, right? Like an assigned purity leader, revolutionary, stands up against the original Revolutionary Guard, starts throwing broken bottles, all hell breaks loose, everybody has to take sides. It's an absolute standard feature of every movement.
Yeah, but I mean, like in the no virus thing, it's incredibly annoying. Even if a lot of the individuals perhaps might be on the right side of scientific history, there is this type of militant, cult-like thing. I don't know what the right term is to describe a lot of these people. I'll mention Carrie Mullis and how he was trying to search for the link between HIV and AIDS, and suddenly I get people saying to me, he was a shill and all sorts of stuff, and you can't speak about him at all because he believed in viruses. And it just completely dismantles any type of healthy discourse.
Yeah, let me take a deep breath, and here's how I want to say this. One of the strangest things about this, so there's the HIV fight that starts in 1987, and essentially that war, according to me, ends in 2008, the year Christine Majori died. And right now, I don't have a lot of time I'll just say the death of one of the leading figures of the HIV dissent movement, named Christine Majori, signaled for both sides the effective end of the so-called, it was called the HIV, let's call it a war. Some people called it the HIV. So this is like round one, 1987 through 2008. In 2020, after COVID, the questions roar back. They come back around especially PCR, because with HIV, they didn't diagnose anybody with PCR, but PCR was like a supportive, tyrannical technology. Now you have people really jumping out of their socks, cottoning on, many of them very outstanding and doing a lot of great work. I kind of want to avoid names, at least for the time being. And so it revs up into this, I want to kind of name it something. It's like virus and causation and PCR study or understanding part two. That's a very bad name for it. What shall we call it? In other words, there was a war that nobody heard of or knew of, or was most of the people who joined in round two never heard of what came before. They just somehow cottoned on in 2020. Like, this makes no sense. How can somebody transmit a disease if they're asymptomatic? PCR, right? So now there's like lots of people all over the world and all kinds of channels, and it was amazing. It was like a renaissance of the very questions that we were so crucified and destroyed for forging all those years. But what also happened was that there was a militant strand in it, some of whom were around fractioning the original movement, who came in as purifiers, super radical, revolutionary, I call them Trotskyites, who started to demand this purification of all the issues and started to rubbish all the people who had come before, some of whom I've described, in the most unbelievably vicious, unjust, and abusive terms. And I was one of them. There were many others, and the attack on Carrie Mullis was one of those chapters in the whole thing that was so unbelievably downright strange, You know, like you can look at somebody just having sort of an epileptic fit on a bus or something. Like, where is, I mean, you know, and it's like, what I mean by that is it seemed like a fit of destruction for the sake of destruction, or defamation for the sake of defamation. Like it became cool to just attack and to show to some force out there that you're one of the purists now. So they called themselves No Virus. They didn't call themselves, weirdly, they didn't talk about the Perth group particularly, because it used to be there was a battle between the Perth group and the Duisburgians, and, you know, I could say a lot about that. But in this new fight and this new purity, it felt synthetic to me. It felt planted. It felt like there were bad actors who had been planted there to run this new script, which made absolutely no sense. Here's what makes no sense, starting with this, that people should cotton on, as I say, to a matter that was, you know, like the ground is soaked in other people's blood for all these decades, and people suddenly crop up and they're going to send other people to the cornfield. You know, that episode of Twilight Zone, the tyrant boy sends people to the cornfield for wrong think. That's what they were doing. That one is out, that one is out, that one is, and it's like, wait, but you guys just turned up? Who are you? I never heard of you. You weren't part of this back when we really could have used you, back when we were all getting slaughtered out here. But they had this self-anointed, absolute vicious righteousness that, yeah, yes, you're damn right. We are here now, and we're telling everybody who's good and who's bad and who's pure and who's not. And it was so bizarre, I could not even actually understand it for a long time, or kind of deal with it or write about it. And I don't like writing about it. It makes me miserable. What I would say to people who push that, who are decent but are Kool-Aided, who have picked this up somewhere, like, yeah, Carrie Mullis was bullshit, and Peter Duisberg was no hero, and they believe in viruses.
They're just grifters. Yeah, they're just grifters.
Grifters? Wait, people all of whose money was taken away? Peter Duisberg was defunded by Anthony Fauci in 1987, never received another federal, sorry, I gotta stay calm. Okay, what I would say, I'm gonna try to do it calmly, is if you weren't there, with all due respect, you don't understand what this war was about, what was in it. You're just here now in a very safe, air-conditioned field with your little channels, and you're tinkering with the science, and you're really smart, and you're really kind of full of yourselves, but you do not understand what it meant for example, Peter Duisberg to be on that mountain facing, like, for example, the AZT death train coming right at him. All of these multi-trillion-dollar attacks coming, and there was no such thing as having your channel or your following or your Substack or brain. It was just punishment, in some cases death. So when I say people don't understand what that war was about, they think like, oh, Peter Duisberg was sitting around saying, well, you know, retroviruses are really important, and I'm here to represent, don't ever take away my retroviruses. He was the one who introduced the very idea of opposing this mammoth force of Robert Gallo, Anthony Fauci, and the WHO. And there was no such thing as interfering with that spell before Peter Duisberg. It was about, yes, causation, toxicity, transmission. Duisberg was the first to say AIDS is not a sexually transmissible disease. So it's extremely reductionist to say that he isn't in harmony with most of what the contemporary post-2020 guys like Tom Cowan say. There's so much in what he and the other dissidents forged that is exactly in line with what they said, except that they didn't dispatch entirely of the notion of the existence of these putative entities. Okay, But if you think that is such a big deal, you don't understand what the battle was about and how people were getting killed on, people having to poison their kids to death or lose custody of their kids. And Duisburg is sitting there like writing letters, testifying, showing up. It was a blood battle. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. A lot of people died. I have friends who were murdered. So I get emotional about these people who have like the luxury to turn up now, and tell those people and the memory of those people that they're bullshit. I sort of can't believe it from a spiritual perspective. I can't believe being that uncharitable.
It's very arrogant. It's self-important. These purity tests are destructive. They don't actually do anything good.
They think, this is how purists think. Purist revolutionaries think. Like, we are do you know how many times we had purity cults in the HIV? Like, this one came along, they were always brand new and they came in. All of you are, what you've done, okay, nice try, but you're bullshit. But I have the purity angle and I'm going to, send them all into a cocked hat. I'm going to push them. This is grandiosity. It is a gross misunderstanding of the depth, scope, and nature of this evil that one is up against. One is not up against virology. One is up against an evil system that wants to depopulate the world. It's essentially the New World Order, and this is the blind spot. It's actually way less stressful to just deal with dispatching of virology if you're not taking into account the actual political, ideological, and spiritual beast behind it all. Behind both of these things.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned Eleni Papadopoulos. Most people don't know her name, and she did incredible work.
She did incredible work, and she was a lovely human being.
Sorry, I pronounced it Eleni, but how is it pronounced? She was Greek
her
or
first
something.
name, I've always heard Eleni.
Eleni. Yes,
Yeah.
Eleni.
I want to explain the rift that happened, and then the rift that happened then, and then how it has mutated into the present day rift around Eleni's work. There is a commonly held view that was held by many HIV dissidents at the time that Peter Duisburg had, by not accepting what Eleni and the Perth group were saying, that HIV's existence had not been proven. They were always very careful not to say HIV does not exist, but there's no proof of its existence. To put it simply, Peter Duisburg came back and said, I think it exists but is harmless. It's to each person to decide whether that is something worthy of a war, a divide that's worthy of a total split, or whether that's a fractional difference. For a person who is, quote unquote, diagnosed as HIV positive and told they're going to die, and that's really who we should be focusing on. What's the difference to that person? One camp is saying HIV exists but is harmless. You don't need to worry about it. It is not going to kill you. And one camp is saying, in fact, there's no proof of its existence. I feel that becomes a very esoteric, almost like ivory tower distinction. I always felt that. Can we please stay united and keep hostilities out? I can't answer for or explain why Peter doesn't see Eleni's case. But what began to happen was there was a story that grew that Peter had sabotaged Eleni's work by not recognizing it. I know that she had a lot of pain and anguish about it. She respected him. She loved him. She did feel thwarted, rejected by his inability to see what she was saying. And it caused a tremendous and deep, painful rift in the movement, from which we never recovered. And the HIV dissent movement crumbled along these lines. Now to see it flare up again in an even more malignant form, which is also ahistorical, because the people jumping on the bandwagon now don't know the history and aren't interested in the history. But it's become fashionable to posit this point of purity as the one pinnacle of saving the world. If we dispatch of the notion of viruses existing, we'll save the world, right? Everything will be fine. But I argue that is to willfully ignore the entirety of the violent apparatus built around this whole thing. It's to suggest that all that is required is a precise correction of what I call an esoteric scientific difference. I think that issue is important, and they can battle it out, and God bless them and good luck to them. But it isn't going to help people under caught in the death trap.
Yes.
So they're different issues. What are you trying to achieve, right? Are you trying to get people out of the trap, or are you trying to achieve scientific exactitude and rightness and correctness in some place in another dimension? I don't know. They are different quests.
They are, Celia, because if you go around shouting viruses don't exist, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Let's just say I agree with you. Let's just say, okay, sure, I agree, viruses don't exist. What now?
Well,
it's a very strange piece of discourse, because it doesn't go anywhere.
It's a very strange piece of discourse. I would like to put on the table the word and examine it very closely. Their word exist. The word exist, to exist. I have argued, and I argue, that HIV and COVID, let's start with HIV. It was brought into being not merely as a biological artifact or non-artifact, but as a massive spiritual attack made possible by diabolical technologies that were created to induce and suggest its presence, the so-called HIV tests, and the entire propaganda apparatus around HIV. So I actually argue there was an it that exists. It's like saying, does a malevolent spirit exist if you can't see it and put it in a bottle and throw it over a cliff? It's still perturbing. And this gets into, are we secular materialists? Or do we believe this is spiritual warfare, which I do? So I think we had to fight, quote unquote, HIV as a diabolical, technocratic, possessed idea and set of technologies that very much existed because they made it exist. It wasn't really going to help us that the it didn't exist in its purest form as a biological pathogen. Again, I think it is to look away from the beast itself and everything that the beast uses to crush people.
Do you think a lot of that is by emergence or by design?
I have come to believe it's by design.
So like infiltration.
I believe that as a so-called movement, our biggest mistake was to never consider infiltration.
Just hang on, sorry, Celia. Sorry. I'm going to jump in right there. You've said movement a few times, and I kind of get uncomfortable when you say movement.
I know,
because
me too. Yeah. Okay. Let me define it. We're left with some words that I'm also uncomfortable with, the so-called HIV dissident movement.
So I don't mean to derail you, but
it's people that came together in different countries from all different walks of life and all different disciplines who abhorred
a collective.
Yeah, but see, that's the wrong. Collective.
So why it makes me feel awkward is because movement seems to suggest that it's outside of science.
Yeah, okay. It was very much a scientific battle, which was battling something that was parascientific. Does that make sense?
100%.
They had introduced the parascientific. And I said in Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book, The Real Anthony Fauci, that what made Fauci so dangerous as a revolutionary, there's that word again, was that he took American science, which up to that point could have been called classical, empirical, you prove things. If it's not proven, it gets thrown out. Everybody agrees, it has to be true, it has to be proven. And he imbued it with this new thing, which, for lack of a better word, I would call woke, as a spiritual infection, as an idea, an ideology, something Fauci could use and did use masterfully. So now there was woke biology, which the classical scientists were horrified by. What are you talking? In other words, everybody gets AIDS, everybody's at equal risk, it spreads like this and like, all of that was woke garbage. But it flew because AIDS was not scientific. It was not a normal disease. It was an installed set of revolutionary ideologies that were installed around notions of public health, contagion, human intimacy. This is all social engineering, according to me. But everybody fought it where they fought it. And those who fight it, if only we had gotten it right, if only Duisburg had gotten out of the way or bowed down to Eleni and the Perth group, we could have. I sort of can't believe that's even an argument. Or that anybody who has studied any history of violent overthrows and revolutions could think that that would have saved the day. It's totally baffling to me.
We've been fighting this HIV/AIDS information war since the 80s, from back when they called it GRID, and then they didn't like the word gay being included in it, so they changed it. Just on that, anybody who spends 30 seconds thinking about its so-called origins should laugh the whole thing off. I mean, it was this supposed virus that suddenly didn't like gay men in New York nightclubs, and at the same time didn't like a group of black people in Africa. The whole thing didn't make any sense. And then they took years to try and formalize some sort of definition for it, if I have my understanding correct.
I think you just put your finger on something very important. The whole thing didn't make any sense. What if that's the actual attack? What if that's the actual attack? To introduce, this is sort of gets into MK Ultra, monarch mind control, to break reality in people's minds, to introduce this new grand scale gaslighting thing, where things don't have to make sense. That's why we went so collectively and individually out of our minds, because we were, this doesn't make any sense and this isn't adding up. And it, as I say, it never put a dent in it. And so I want people to understand that these things are built that way before they are launched. They're built to not, like, infinitely elastic. So HIV theory, such as it was, could be stretched. Whatever happened that did not make any sense and did not add up, they just stretched it, and it swallowed it up, it accommodated it, it added some new woke language, and then presto, it was the new thing and the new thing. So I'm not just saying that they were dogmatic and had all the money and had all the violence. I'm saying the whole thing that they were operating in was not a thing that had any interest in being right or making sense. We were like, that train had left the station. And so now we're into something, what I'm invoking here is that this is a characteristic of this whole era that we're in, if you think about it. Like inversion, confusion, gaslighting, I mean, sending things down on our brains, telling us they are happening and they are real, that aren't even designed to make sense until they fall apart. They arrive as, like, your brain gets so mangled trying to accept it or adopt it. So that's one of the characteristics of a cult, right? Or of a, and I think that part is deliberate. But where they cook these things up is another thing altogether. Where they, in other words, this thing was hatched somewhere. Not just Gallo standing there saying, we have found the probable cause of AIDS and the United States government and all of that, but the whole thing. So let's just talk about it for a moment. People were overnight mass-induced to believe that a new deadly virus, in this case retrovirus, had jumped species from an African green monkey. This really is the origin theory, I'm not joking, via a Canadian flight attendant that was written about in a book that was fiction by Randy Schiltz. And people were then induced to believe that this bugaboo, this it, was anywhere, it could be anywhere, it could be on a toilet seat, could be on a salad leaf. Gay men would come home for Thanksgiving, and after they left, their mothers would like throw the dishes out, so it really was the dawn, the introduction of terrorizing baseless contagion theory for the modern age. And what a toy for them. Imagine what they could do with this new evil toy, because they knew somehow that there's something in the human psyche that responds to these ideas of contagion with tremendous force, with tremendous fear. And then to think that all those decades of blood, sweat, and tears from all the dissident configurations in different countries, including yours, your country made a great contribution, that all of that went into the gutter, and COVID comes along, and it's even more batshit and surreal, and like not even, it's like a bad cartoon. It's not even a good pack of lies. And yet COVID flies even more than AIDS did. People believed it even more than they believed it. People just believed it. So the social engineers obviously know something about our deepest psyches. I can't believe anybody believed it. I can't believe anybody believed, like, for example, in a city like New York City, where I'm from, that after all this time of being New York City, where people are coming in from all over, it's a filthy place, that, oh no, now there's this little thing that, is going to kill everybody. I don't know what that, of course, I was immunized against it from my work, but what I'm trying to say is this all really should be addressed as massive MK Ultra mind control projects first, and social engineering projects first, money laundering, criminal cartels first. And then I don't even know what the point is anymore of tinkering with the science. And one thing that was different about COVID, it didn't even have a father. Bob Gallo at least was standing up there making his insane claims about so-called HIV, but nobody fathered SARS-CoV-2 as the cause of AIDS as a causation theory. Proving my point again, that they launched these things, the global beast, and it's decades in the planning, and they know something about our psyches, and they have all the patents and all the technologies, and they have their aims, which I don't think we quite understand yet. We understand they wanted to kill a lot of people. We understand it was a test run. And I really think if people want to understand what might they actually be up to, you really have to look into the deep history of the New World Order, the deep Masonic plots, the Club of Rome, all that kind of stuff. And people who like to focus on esoteric science, they never touch that stuff. Have you noticed that?
Yes. Just for clarity, because somebody listening to this for the first time might not be following terribly much of what you and I are talking about, because my assumption is that whoever's listening to this already knows your work and already kind of knows the subject matter. But the gist of it is that there isn't evidence that, based on the current definition of HIV, such a pathogen exists and spreads to another person and causes something called AIDS.
Correct. And the way you can, okay, let's look around for a moment. It's 2025. You have for example, the P. Diddy trial, or you take a figure like Jeffrey Epstein, or you take a figure like, leave aside for a moment the issue of blackmail, human trafficking, child trafficking, which is what we usually think we're talking about only when we talk about these figures. But think about the sex part for a moment, and then think about AIDS theory for a moment. Back in the 80s, the mantra and the indoctrination, the heavy revolutionary indoctrination, was that any act of unprotected sex could kill anybody, any broken condom, etc. Why wouldn't the most, and they have OnlyFans, you have a world now that is very sexually promiscuous. You could even say it's all like a big sort of, or it's like orgiastic, right? Sex is off of every kind of harness or chain, right? This is a highly, highly sexualized era. And what do you never hear? I got AIDS from, you have these women also, this just screams Tavistock to me, these blonde British women who claim they're having, has sex with 1,000 men a day.
It is unbelievable, and it's so gross.
Because again, they're trying to break our souls. And because you interviewed Mike Williams, that the Beatles was one of the first big social engineering project, like a wedge weapon to shatter family values, Christian ethos, all kinds. So this is what this crowd is always after. And I don't see any chance whatsoever that those OnlyFans women, and it's really odd that they're always British and they look very similar. They're all blonde, they're all British, they look very similar. This is an op. And so what does that op want? It wants to destroy women. I think the main goal of these people, the number one goal, is to destroy women. and to destroy human bonds and to destroy the human soul. So if we want to take a step back and say, wait, really? HIV wasn't correct? I just ask people, it's like, PSYOPs, they're all over. 9/11, PSYOP. AIDS, PSYOP. COVID, PSYOP. The way to see them, Pearl Harbor, like, it takes about 20 years. And then the back end, like as if half an airplane just fell off, it just falls off. It's just not there. The thing that they used to forge it, to weaponize it, is evidently not happening in our world, but it has moved on. And the op doesn't want to be correct or true or right or proven right or nobody. It doesn't need to be. It's an attack. And it serves its purpose in its time. And then they move on to the next attack. But if we're still talking about, can we be certain that HIV theory, which was that it was a sexually transmissible disease, highly transmissible, very invariably lethal, but it was supposed to be sexual. And this is why I insist Duisberg deserves way more credit from his contemporary critics in the no virus movement, because I remember vividly, and I broke out in a cold sweat when he came out and said, it's not sexually transmissible, right? And then we had all kinds of things we came upon, that there was no HIV in human semen. And so these wars, you see, and now they're pushing so much sex and they're simply not mentioning it. When was the last time you heard anybody mention, oh, be careful with sex, you could get AIDS? It's over.
Here in South Africa, you never hear anything about it. It's over, long gone.
It's over, right? So what are we actually talking about right now when we talk about hindsight and who was right?
If HIV theory were true and it's a virus that's contagious, why is there no vaccine?
Yeah, that's a weird one, because there was Gallo, as you know, said there would be after years. And this, again, Duisberg always said that. So how did they tell people they quote unquote had HIV? They said it was antibodies. Normally, the thing in the classical world that they blew up overnight, that was how it was determined that you had defeated an infection. That was the premise of vaccinology. So how would you develop an AIDS vaccine that would induce antibodies what are they, like the good antibodies, whereas the HIV positive, infected, stained, tarnished, doomed people have the bad antibodies? It's all batshit. That's what's hardest to believe, that it's all batshit. Multi-trillion-dollar batshit.
I asked a gay friend of mine if he knows of any gay people who have AIDS, and he said no. Now, that might just be anecdotal, and he is a normie, so to speak. But he literally takes poppers.
Interesting. Well, I have come to think that we had one of our blind spots in the dissident discourse was the hepatitis B vaccine in the late 70s that went out to gay men in the big cities in America. And I think maybe that we always said it was, so Duisberg in his defense, when they insisted, well, Duisberg, if HIV doesn't cause AIDS, then what does? And he formulated his toxicological model that it was a drug, a chemical syndrome.
It's likely. No, it's likely.
But there could have been a kickoff factor like that, like the hepatitis B vaccine program. We just didn't really talk about that because we just thought it was probably drug-induced multifactorial. But all I can say is there's just like something did happen, and we were never quite able to create the perfect causation model. Only to say the one they gave us is definitely false. But then
AIDS is also it's this collection. It's a whole collection of different
we're even
symptoms.
Talking about, right? There was a clear gay men in cities like New York, Los Angeles, and so in the late 70s, early 80s, and they had they had Kaposi sarcoma, they had pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. There was an it. It was a catastrophic, I don't even know if it's correct to say immune crash, but there was an it. And they called it acquired immune deficiency syndrome, which was a correct name. Then, follow this, when Gallo announced his virus as the cause of AIDS and patented the first HIV test, I think his patent kicked in the day after. Now, and this is very sinister what happens right here, they kick the ball out, so now AIDS becomes something that you determine by way of an antibody test, and it is something that will come to you in the future according to these wizards, according to these witch doctors, that you test, and at first they said 1 year, you will probably be dead within a year of testing. So this is healthy people now. Oh my God, and they test positive. And then we say they have AIDS because they have tested positive. So the better part of our war was about separating all this out. There wasn't men who had AIDS. Most of them were finished off by AZT in the early years. And then later,
including famous people like Freddie Mercury.
Yep. And Nureyev and Arthur Ashe. Yep. And Keith Haring died of DDI within a week or two and was healthy. So do you see what I'm saying? If you see it like a split history, in the beginning, there are real sick people, real gay men are sick and showing up at hospitals. There's an it. Then comes the HIV as the cause of AIDS announcement from Gallo. Then comes the HIV test. And now it fans out into this massive net based on this totally non-specific technology that cross-reacts with at least up to 60 different non-HIV proteins and factors. Now you're into the big money. And it resembles the monetary system in the following way. I'm a little obsessed with this, and I wonder if this will resonate with you. It's it's the first debt-based syndrome where you're projecting people to be indebted to their putative illness in the future based on your theology of that HIV will lead to AIDS. Did they ever have, let me ask everybody this, did they ever have a group of people who seroconverted to HIV positivity, and they watched them and they found, they get sick after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Of course not. It was entirely fictional. They make things up, and that's what we can't understand as sort of children of the grand experiment. Like, we can't understand that they just make things up, but they do. So now you have people who are endlessly getting tested. They're gay men, they're sexually active, and they're properly worried about HIV/AIDS according to, proper doctrine. So they're getting tested all the time. Ka-ching, ka-ching, all the money comes in, tested, they're getting their viral load tested. And now you really also have to introduce, what about the mind? They've been told they're doomed. They've been told they're essentially already dead. Now they're going on a battery of medications which are extremely toxic to the liver and other organs. And now they're beginning to die with syndromes, get sick and die with syndromes that are, guess what? So similar to AIDS. And they built that into it too. It's all built so that you can't tell what is what. You can't make any distinctions, and that's in the design. Yes,
confusion leads to mass anxiety, as Matthias Desmet has spoken about. And when you have mass anxiety, you have a lot of people grabbing onto perhaps bad ideas, and that's what he calls mass formation.
Yeah, you asked about light and hope. I think maybe the light is streaming in from all directions, but it's definitely not going to be a big moment like the fall of the Berlin Wall. The light is in how open-minded, astute, alert, questioning, and spell-breaking so many people are now. The light is in the mass rejection of mass media and the spellcasters, and the mass awareness that the media is just a mammoth mind control CIA MK Ultra project. That's because COVID was such a sloppy op. Even though it was successful in many ways, it was very sloppy and crude, and they alienated most people. I mean, they alienated all but the most totally prone to indoctrination. So they lost a lot of people. So that I would call that light. We're kind of in the enlightenment in that regard. We're not saved, right? No one's coming to save us. These people are still at their posts working their evil. But when this whole nightmare began, most people could not conceive of, why would Fauci lie, and why would they all lie? That was the average response. Oh, they wouldn't. It was sort of like everybody thought, Daddy wouldn't do that to us, whether it was Daddy Public Health or Daddy Media.
What is your Substack's address?
It is Celia, Celia Farber celiafarber.substack.com. It's called The Truth Barrier. And my book, I'll hold it up, is called Serious Adverse Events, An Uncensored History of AIDS. Came out, it was reissued in 2023. It's on, what's it called? Amazon. And the first chapter, I just want to say this, we've talked a lot about Peter Duesberg in this interview, and what they did to him is all summed up in what I think is my favorite chapter in the book, which is chapter 1, and it's called The Passion of Peter Duesberg. I wrote it for Harper's in 2006.
Celia Farber, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you so much.